Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. If you enjoy these podcasts, please feel free to share them. Take them forward to people that you might not necessarily know are looking at the issues and situations that we're talking about, because most people don't say things. If you've got any interesting topics that you would like me to look at in these podcasts, please drop me a line. Ian at counsellingwakefield.org.uk will get me, and then we can kind of put them into the podcast schedule. So today, looking at supporting children to explore the aspects of their identity and sexuality. It's much more prominent a process nowadays, in a way that we talk about it than it ever was in my day when I was kind of becoming a teenager and exploring my ideas of gender and sexuality. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing that we can talk about, we can share it. Young people can have their own ideas around these things instead of being told they should be this or they should be that. That's a really confusing place for them, because if they don't feel they can talk to the parents, the guardians, people that they can trust, then they tend to keep it to themselves. That process of not being aware of my gender, my sexuality, my area of process with that in relationships and in a relationship with myself can be really hard if we can't share it, if we can't talk about it. A lot of parents, a lot of older people feel very uncomfortable about that, talking about those issues, those situations, scenarios. And that's because of our conditioning, certainly my conditioning when I was growing up. Wasn't to be able to talk about those kind of things, and in a sense shut down if you even did try and talk about them. So younger people these days, teenagers, young people, they're exploring those ideas because they feel comfortable in doing so, because there's been conversations, permission given to do so. In a sense, they don't feel uncomfortable, they don't feel ashamed or guilty by kind of thinking about those things. And when I work with young people with these kind of issues, they usually say to me that they have no idea totally who they are with that aspect of themselves, their gender, their sexuality. It seems to come forward, it seems to progress, it seems to develop. It's an exploration. So they might find themselves having thoughts, well, I'm gay, or I'm lesbian, or I'm bisexual. And they might use those terminologies to define something that is not easy to define. Because once you define something, you kind of stick yourself in a container. You kind of tick box it, you know. That then can be restrictive, because if you tick box yourself too early, then that might make it awkward to try and develop and to grow and to change and to alter as you get older, because things do change with our gender, our sexuality. They're changing most of the way through our lives. We don't see it that way sometimes, but we will have different relationships with people. We'll have different processes from the people around us, and we will share time with friends who have different ideas of their gender and sexuality. And we'll have conversations with them, which is really good, because obviously that's an open process of discovery. It's when we feel uncomfortable saying those things, when we feel uncomfortable sharing those things, that it becomes much more a negative process for us. We dwell on it as a we must be wrong, we can't be right, you know, we're different, all those kind of things, which everybody's different on the planet. So there's no two people that are going to have that same journey. They're going to have similar aspects of that journey, obviously. But if we think that we're wrong, if we think that the way we see ourselves is wrong, that internalization process can lead to lots of conflict inside of us in our mental health and those areas, because we don't know where we are. And human beings like to know where we are, or like to have a sense of where we are. So when we're looking at our gender and our sexuality, to have that open conversation for the parents that's looking at this, for even for the therapist that's looking for this. These are conversations that you should have as part of our work, even if it's not necessarily the work we're doing. A lot of young people come to me with anxiety, with processes of depression, that might be doing some self-harm, cutting, maybe other forms of self-harm, or maybe emotional self-harm, keeping themselves to themselves. And when we start talking about that anxiety and the things that I've just said, by exploring the wider aspect of their world, a lot of the time I come down to this gender and sexuality identity process, in that the confusion they have, or where they can't talk about it where they would like to. That then stems to other things, quite naturally. The kind of internalization is the symptom, not the cause. So when we start talking about that confusing process for everybody on the planet, nobody knows straight off usually that tick box exercise. Because you might find that, yes, you initially are attracted to other boys, other males, which is fine. But as you do that process, you then grow, develop, you might find that you're attracted to females as well. So you might be bisexual. You might not be attracted to anybody sexually. You may be asexual. There's a whole range of ways that we describe those things nowadays. But as soon as you describe somebody and put yourself in a box, if that box doesn't fully fit, if you can't fully engage with that box and say, yeah, this is me, which most people can't, then over a period of time, it becomes uncomfortable, the box. It becomes harder to be in the box. You feel that stepping out the box is wrong. So that shame, that guilt, all those kind of things come on board. And then we find ourselves in places where we resent being in the box, and we'll become argumentative with people that try and put us in the box, even though we've told those people that's our identity, which is very confusing, certainly as you're growing through those teenage years and young adult years. So when you're looking at this, when you're working with this, don't automatically believe you need to be in any box. You have to be in your identity, which will not be a box. It will not be a tick aspect. When we're looking at supporting people who are going through these really difficult ideas, understandings of themselves, that is constantly changing usually, that we move from this place to that place to the other place. When we're looking at supporting those people, if we can see it as not one thing, one box, one tick, if we can allow that conversation to be many boxes and many ticks, then we might get a more healthy process with the young person. That might change as we get older. We might move through a process of feeling ourselves, yes, we are heterosexual. We are in a relationship. We are married. And then we get to a point in our worlds and our lives where that no longer it sits right. And we might then have to change that aspect of ourselves, which would be very difficult sometimes, because other people have seen us in that particular identity for a long period of time. And then all of a sudden we find that we didn't really fit. We fitted because we were told we should fit. And that coming out expression that people use is massively hard, because we've been in that process for a period of time. We may have children, we may have grandchildren, and our partners, our families, everybody around us, our friends have always seen us in a particular aspect of our gender, our sexuality, because that's what we've said, or that's what we've shown by being in those relationships. It's much harder then to try to adapt and change and alter those things because of how it will affect everybody else, really. So when we're looking at exploring those things as therapists, as parents, as guardians, as friends, as anybody that really the people trust or believe in, then we have to have that open conversation. We have to say, okay, it's not what we think it is, it's what they know it is. And a lot of people that I meet in later life who are going around those concepts of coming out and being them for the first time in their lives always knew that there was a difference with them. It hasn't come as a shock to them. It's come as a shock to everybody else, but not to them. But they moved their identity, their sexuality in a place that was usually comfortable for everybody else. So it became more comfortable for them to be engaging with those people. There's a lot of conversations around the trans world at the moment, and that's a really hard world for people who are in that transition process. Because again, where do you fit within that transition process? Because it is a transition. So it's really hard to get a sense of that, to understand it. When you're not in it, you're not living it. I get a sense of it because of the work I do. And I do a fair bit of work with trans people, young and old. And I can't know it, but I get a sense of it by what they tell me. And that process that transitional process is really hard for them to feel comfortable with sometimes. Not because of them. They're usually quite okay with it. They want to be somebody else, some identity that's different, some sexuality that's different. But they usually feel okay. They understand that transition process. They understand where they are in it. Although it might not be happening as quick as they wanted to do nowadays, because of all the other things that have to happen around that. But they kind of like get a sense of that, and they feel okay with that. The main process that they say to me is that it's how everybody else is being affected by it that causes them problems, issues. And that aspect of fitting in, that we all try and do, and everybody in society tries to fit into something, that process of fitting in doesn't allow for that individuality sometimes. It doesn't allow for that person to be fully them. And sometimes people say to me in the counselling room, this is the only place that I feel that aspect of being comfortable with myself. As soon as I walk out that door, out this session, the world does not feel comfortable. And that's a really hard place to be. That as soon as you engage with another person, i.e. public, friends, relationships, you can't be fully yourself. There's a lot of reasons why that happens. There might be family scripts that say that these things are impossible, maybe. There might be people who engage with you that says, I need you to be X, Y, Z because of my needs or other people's needs. A whole range of reasons why we don't show ourselves fully, and which is a shame. It is a shame. If we can be more open, if we can be more able to have those dialogues, have those conversations, at least give the permission for the conversations to happen, and allow whatever comes out of that conversation to be respected and valued, even if we don't understand it, and we may not, then at least the person we're engaging with is able to be more them. I don't know if anybody is ever fully them, to be fair. I think there's possibly always a piece of us that wants to conform, to fit in, and I think that will direct us in certain ways, not just with our gender and sexuality, but with other things in our lives. So I don't think personally, and it is a personal thing, I don't think we ever are fully us, because we're always conforming to something, whatever that might be. But I think if we can have that open dialogue, and nowadays, to be fair, much more than when I was a young person, people can have that dialogue. It's still awkward and it's still impossible, some places, but it's more acceptable in the wider aspects of social interaction to have those conversations. And we don't try and put anybody in a box. And we might want to put them in the box not because we want to harm them emotionally or hurt them mentally, but because that, in a sense, we're trying to protect them. We're trying to make them okay to be outside in society, to be accepted by other people. The motivation behind it might not be to harm. The motivation might be to help. But usually it's about not understanding, about not having that conversation or dialogue. I remember a long time ago when my dad was alive, and there was a programme, a film, Quentin Crispy. It's a long time ago. Some of you might not remember that. And it was about a naked civil servant was the title. And it was about a man who was coming out, and a process of coming out. My dad was a traditional sort of guy. Mum was much more open and able to look at things, but Dad was very traditional. And he said to me as this film was progressing, and he obviously realised what the content was, and my mum had wanted to watch it, and I wanted to watch it as well. And my dad got very uncomfortable with the topic, the conversation, the film, and the conversations me and my mum were having. And he got very defensive. And I said to him, there was a break in the commercials or something like that. And I said to him, so what would happen if I gave you a kiss? On the lips, but a kiss, an affectionate kiss, because I love you, Dad. And I went up to him, and the reaction was instantaneous. He really did not like that. And I kind of got a sense of his fear, his frustration in not being able to connect with me in that way. And I think it was the fear of having something that was outside of his normality in an interactive process between two men. And I wasn't kissing him because I fancied him. I was going to prove, unfortunately, because I was a teenager, prove a point. And teenagers do that sometimes. And I put him into this really awkward, uncomfortable place. And he reacted very aggressively with it and very defensive. He didn't hit me or anything, but he shrugged me off and he went out the room. And in that process, it gave me a bit of understanding, only a very bit of understanding of how somebody that isn't accepted could feel. And it felt for me as though I must be the wrong one. I must be the one at fault because he was rejecting me. So in my world, I kind of like looked at it in a way of understanding and building this aspect of awareness, understanding about what people do and how people do what they do and what kind of gets in the way of those things and the fears and vulnerabilities that we all have, in a sense. And trying to understand that made me realise that in that very brief moment, he really could not move his ideas, even with somebody he loved and he cared about. But he couldn't really get that process. And so the only way he could cope with that was to disengage and leave. And for a while after that, there was a very awkward connection between me and him. And that was unfortunate and obviously not helpful. But it gave me an understanding of my ideas, my roles, my processes, that it's okay to hug your dad. It's your dad. It's okay to give him a kiss and to connect emotionally with him. It's your dad. And that was something I hadn't realised until that point. I had never been allowed to do that. And I still wasn't allowed to do it. He still reacted not necessarily helpfully. But when we got going later on in life and he was getting to the end of his life, and we were having conversations, he remembered that. And it gave us a bond. It gave us something that connected us. And I don't know why that particular situation was awkward for him. It certainly wasn't for me. But in those final years when he was able to have those conversations, it really gave me a feeling of connection. And I wish, can't go back in time obviously, but I wish I'd have had that when I was growing up. I wish I could have had that relationship, that connection with him. And it's a shame that I couldn't. In the last 4 or 5 years, I did. But for 50 odd years, I hadn't. And if I think we'd have had that conversation, if we'd have had that process, we would probably be much closer. We would have probably spent more time together, and we would probably be more in each other's lives. So don't wait until there's a point in time when you can have those conversations. Have them early on. Get that connection. Talk about those situation scenarios. Don't put anybody in a box. Allow them to be them, whatever them is. And make them feel comfortable in themselves. Hopefully that's stimulated some ideas. These are my ideas. I don't say that's the same for everybody. It's just the way I look at the world and how I've been given the world by clients, by people around me. And maybe that will help other people to have these open conversations. That's what I want to get from that. That you can, from this moment of seeing this, wherever you are, whoever you are, you can have those open conversations. You can find the reality of the person instead of sticking them in a box. I'm Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Thanks very much. Take care. Enjoy.